So, with Nashville being out of the playoffs as I'm recording this, Nashville is now the latest of the President's Trophy winners to not win a Stanley Cup. But, see, it's funny because we always talk about parity and what parity is now. So I thought, you know what? Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the last 29 Stanley Cup winners out of the last 30 years, because 2005 robbed us of a Stanley Cup winner, and just see where you finish and what matters. And then I thought, you know what? Let's do something else that's kind of fun, which is prove that Pekka Rinne is probably going to win the Vezina, because Vezina usually means no to a Stanley Cup. 1988, Mario Lemieux's the MVP of the league, the Hart Trophy winner. No Stanley Cup for him. Grant Fuhr is the Vezina Trophy winner. The Edmonton Oilers finished third in the league with 99 points, and they won the Stanley Cup. So there they are at third, which is a position currently occupied by Tampa in this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. 1989, Wayne Gretzky's MVP. No Stanley Cup. Patrick Roy's the Vezina winner. Nope. The President's Trophy winning Calgary Flames win that year with 117 points. Of course, they're out. The number one team is out. That's Nashville. 1990, Mark Messier wins the Hart Trophy. Patrick Roy, another Vezina. No Stanley Cup for him. The number 5 rated team in the NHL in the regular season is Edmonton with 90 points, and they win the Stanley Cup. And they're one of only 2 teams that was 5th in the NHL to win it. 1991, Brett Hull wins the MVP. Eddie Belfour wins Vezina. No cup for them. 1991. The number 7 rated team in the NHL, the Pittsburgh Penguins, win the Stanley Cup with 88 points. 3 times a team in 7th place has won the Stanley Cup in the last 29 seasons. 1992, Mark Messier wins the MVP. Patrick Roy wins the Vezina. The Stanley Cup's won by the number 6 rated Pittsburgh Penguins, who had 87 points that year. So isn't it interesting that the Pittsburgh Penguins, of the last 29 Stanley Cup winners, minus 2 Stanley Cup winners who won during lockout-shortened seasons, the Pittsburgh Penguins had the 2 lowest point totals with 88 and 87. They were 7th in the league. They were 6th in the league. And yet what we remember is that's when Mario Lemieux and the Penguins could have been a huge dynasty. So what we remember is just those Stanley Cups and not the fact that they weren't great during the regular season. And they didn't have a winner of a Hart Trophy or a Vezina either year. Tom Barrasso was underrated, honestly. In 1993, Mario Lemieux wins the MVP, which means he's not allowed to have the Stanley Cup. Ed Belfour gets the Vezina. So, yeah, no, that's literally how it works. Mario Lemieux was the Hart Trophy winner, so Pittsburgh stopped winning Stanley Cups. Because if we're going to talk about crazy ideas, why not? Montreal was the number 6 rated team in the NHL with 102 points. Back-to-back years won by a team that finished in the number 6 spot in the league, so clearly this was the sweet spot, but only then because it hasn't happened again since. 1994, Sergei Fedorov is your league MVP. Dominik Hasek wins his first of forever in the Vezina Trophy category. The number 1 rated team in the NHL was the Rangers with 112 points, and they took home the Stanley Cup. But they didn't have a Hart Trophy winner or a Vezina winner. Lindros wins MVP in 95. Hasek wins the Vezina again. The winner was the number 9 team overall, the New Jersey Devils, who had 52 points in 48 games. They were 4 games above 500, and nobody was picking them going to the Stanley Cup playoffs, but they are one of 2 teams that finished in 9th place overall that's won a Stanley Cup. 1996, Mario Lemieux wins MVP. He's not allowed to win a Stanley Cup when he does that. Jim Carey wins the Vezina Trophy because Jim Carey was a good goalie for a while. And the number 2 rated team in the NHL was Colorado that year with 104 points. They win the Stanley Cup. And that's one of 3 times that's happened. In 1997, Dominik Hasek was tired of winning the Vezina, so he decided to win the Hart Trophy too. So he had both trophies, so definitely Buffalo's not allowed to win a Stanley Cup. The number 5 rated team in the NHL was the Detroit Red Wings with 94 points, and they win the Stanley Cup. This is part of the reason why I looked at Washington after, winning President's trophies and saying, you know what, maybe they should just lay off a bit and just coast a bit and not worry about finishing first, and they might be better off. And I kind of was right. 1998, Hasek decided that he wasn't tired of winning all the trophies, so he took both. I think he could have won the Art Ross that year. I think he got lazy. He had the Vezina and the Hart. Detroit was number 3 in the NHL that year with 103 points, and they won the Stanley Cup. So this again comes down to parity. 1999, Jágr gets the Hart Trophy. Hasek got the Vezina again, so he allowed Jágr to have it because fellow countrymen and all this. Probably told the voters just go ahead, give it to Yags. He's been complaining. Dallas was number 1 in the NHL that year. They won with 114 points, but they didn't have a Vezina winner in Ed Belfour, and they didn't have a Hart Trophy winner in Mike Modano. Modano never won the Hart Trophy. 2000, Chris Pronger gets MVP of the league. Olaf Kolzig, goalie the goalie, wins his one and only Vezina Trophy for Washington, so they didn't win it. The winning Stanley Cup team, New Jersey Devils, who were 4th overall that year with 103 points. 2001 was one of those years that, wow, this really happened. Sakic wins the Hart Trophy and the Stanley Cup. Hasek gets the award back for Vezina, and I think it was probably the fact that he probably allowed Kolzig to have it because he thought Kolzig might have been Czech. Found out that Kolzig instead wasn't Czech, and so he took the trophy back. Colorado was 1st overall that year, had 118 points, wins the Stanley Cup, and they have the Hart Trophy. They had a lot of trophies that year. 2002, Jose Theodore comes out of nowhere, wins both the Hart Trophy and the Vezina, which must have made Hasek completely angry. Because Hasek at that point decides, that's it, I'm not winning any more of those Vezina trophies. You can stick them. He's not anywhere else on the board here. 2002 is also one of those years that it happened again. The number 1 rated team in the NHL, the Detroit Red Wings, 116 points, they win. So 3 times in 4 years, the number 1 team in the NHL, the President's Trophy winner, won the Stanley Cup. 2003, Forsberg gets the MVP. Marty Brodeur gets his first Vezina, and this was about 10 years after his career started. New Jersey was rated 4th overall in the NHL with 108 points. They win the Stanley Cup. So Vezina and Stanley Cup go together that year. 2004, Marty St. Louis wins the MVP, the Hart Trophy, and Marty Brodeur gets the Vezina winner, Marty Brodeur is the Vezina winner. Tampa Bay finished 2nd overall with 106 points, and they win the Stanley Cup. I always wrongly remember Tampa as being the President's Trophy winner that year, because to me, they were the best team in the league all year, but they finished 2nd. And they're one of 3 teams that has won the Stanley Cup, being the number 2 team in the NHL. 2006, Joe Thornton goes to San Jose and takes a Hart Trophy when he gets there. Mika Kiprasov wins his only Vezina Trophy in 2006. And Carolina, the number 4 rated team, 112 points. They won the Stanley Cup. I remember that year being key because Carolina did have 112 points. They were 4th in the NHL, but nobody took them really seriously going to the playoffs because they played in the Southeast Division. Was seen as much less difficult to win than any other division. And while that may have been true, it also meant that when they won the Stanley Cup, there was some talk about how, they had an easy run to the finals and they didn't have to go through the teams that everybody else did. Whatever. 2007, Sidney Crosby wins the Hart Trophy, which means he's not allowed to have the Stanley Cup. Marty Brodeur wins another Vezina. No Stanley Cup for him. The winners were the number 4 team in the NHL, Anaheim, with 110 points. So here, in 3 times in 4 years, the team that finishes 4th in the NHL wins the Stanley Cup. Clearly, that's the sweet spot. The problem is it hasn't happened again since. In 2008, Ovechkin wins the Hart Trophy. Brodeur wins the Vezina. Detroit wins the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup. So 115 points for them and a Stanley Cup. 2009, Ovechkin, another Hart Trophy. Tim Thomas with the Vezina. And the Stanley Cup winners, the 8th rated team in the NHL, the Pittsburgh Penguins with 99 points. The only team that finished 8th in the NHL that won the Stanley Cup in the last 29 seasons. And isn't it weird? So Pittsburgh wins the Stanley Cup 7th, 6th, 8th. And their best year that they won a Stanley Cup was last year, but we'll get to that. Pittsburgh is not a team that wins Stanley Cups when they've had fantastic regular seasons. Isn't that weird? 2010, Henrik Sedin wins the Hart Trophy. We know how that ended. Ryan Miller wins the Vezina Trophy. We know how that ended. And the number 3 team overall in the NHL was Chicago, 112 points. They win the Stanley Cup. 2011, Corey Perry is the Hart Trophy winner. Tim Thomas gets the Vezina again. He also wins the Stanley Cup as Boston, the number 7 team overall, with 103 points, wins the Stanley Cup. 2012, this is where everything goes wacky. Evgeny Malkin wins his only Hart Trophy. Henrik Lundqvist gets the only Vezina Trophy of his career thus far. I can say thus far, I guess, and for Malkin thus far as well. Number 13 overall is LA with 95 points, and they win the Stanley Cup. They are the only team below 9th overall in the last 29 seasons that's won a Stanley Cup, and nobody below 14th or below has done it. This is why when I see a team in the first round that's rated that low, and I say, well, they're not going to win it, and then their fans will get mad, like, how do you know? There's parity now, and it's like, just, it's not going to happen. 2013, so this is after LA as an 8th seed comes in and wins the Stanley Cup, and we're all talking about how it doesn't matter where you finish in the NHL, nobody cares anymore. Look, 8th, 3rd, 7th, 13th, clearly the underdogs have a better chance. And then in 2013, in a lockout shortened season, Ovechkin gets MVP, Bobrovsky wins his first Vezina, and the number 1 rated team, Chicago, 77 points. They win themselves the Stanley Cup. Chicago had a fantastic year that year. One of the best seasons anybody's put on. And it really kind of highlighted, if the NHL had a shorter season, you would probably have more fun hockey, but it'll never happen. 2014, Tuukka Rask wins a Vezina. Sidney Crosby wins the Hart Trophy. That's Crosby's second Hart Trophy, which means he's not allowed to win the Stanley Cup. The LA Kings came into the season, or into the postseason, 9th overall, with 100 points, and they are one of 2 teams that finished in 9th that wins. New Jersey was the other one. 2015, Carey Price wins both trophies, clearly in honor of Dominic Hasek and Jose Theodore, also a Montreal goalie that did it once. And Price's wins don't mean anything because he doesn't win the Stanley Cup. Number 7 overall team, Chicago, 102 points, wins the Stanley Cup, one of 3 times that's happened. Patrick Kane wins his first and to this date only Hart Trophy in 2016. Braden Holtby wins to this date his only Vezina Trophy in 2016. And the number 4 overall Pittsburgh Penguins with 104 points win the Stanley Cup. And of course last year, Connor McDavid gets his first Hart Trophy. He's not winning it this year because he didn't want it. Bobrovsky got the Vezina that year. And Pittsburgh was the number 2 team in the NHL, 111 points, and they won the Stanley Cup in second. So the teams in black show you that something different's going on here, and yet it's going to echo the way things have gone over the last 29 seasons. This is the 30th, of course. Winnipeg is number 2 overall in the NHL. We've had 3 Cup winners from that spot. Tampa Bay, we've had 3 Cup winners in the 3rd spot where they are. Vegas is 5th. We've had 2 Stanley Cup winners in that spot. And Washington 6th. We've had 2 Stanley Cup winners in that spot. So, number 1 is still Nashville's spot at first with 7. No, Nashville doesn't win. And definitely, if you look at the numbers, 7 times in 29 years, soon to be 30, we've seen the number 1 overall team win the Stanley Cup, which makes it like, 23 times they failed. But this is what parity does. And if anybody can tell me how the Nashville Predators were necessarily a better team than Winnipeg or Tampa, it's interesting because to me, you can't even get a piece of paper in between them if you're trying to talk about talent on their rosters. This is how parity works. And being 7th or higher is to your benefit. Or 9th. I mean, if we get a 9th place team that wins the Stanley Cup next year, that would be the 3rd time in 31 years. And we can start talking about, hey, if you're 9th place, you're good. But anything 10th and below, you're not going to win the Stanley Cup. Minus that LA. That's once in 29 seasons. So, no, I don't consider there to be any reason to necessarily say, oh, it's the curse again. Because it's weird. It's only a curse to me if the first place team is, say, 10 or more points ahead of number 2. But when you've got 2 or 3 points separating first and second, and there might be 5 or 6 points separating first from fourth in the NHL. It's just a sign of how strong the league is at the top. And this does show that home ice matters. The fact that only 3 teams that have started on the road to start the playoffs, and this is just taking into account teams that were ninth or below. They may very well have had home ice in the first round. Let me take a look. New Jersey. It depends on the division they're in. And LA, I know LA didn't. So maybe not. Anyways, I know LA in 13th. I know they were the number 8 seed. But having home ice matters. If you start out on the road, you're going to have a tough time. The New Jersey Devils in, I want to say 2020. And I think it was the last time they went to the Stanley Cup final that they set the record for most wins on the road. And they didn't win the Stanley Cup. It's hard. It is. Not having Game 7 at home makes a difference, and starting off on the road makes a difference. So the odds are still in favor of Winnipeg and Tampa, because if you look at the spots that they're in, 6 teams have won Stanley Cups in their spots. 4 have won from where Vegas and Washington are. You can make these numbers work any way you want. And I stopped at Hart and Vezina because I ran out of room. I was going to do Norris too. But really, once the playoffs start, the best team will win. And it's not usually a team that necessarily finishes first overall. They may have a tougher division. They may go on a cold streak in October or November. They may struggle at times, but they're playing the best hockey in the league when April rolls around. So there you go. This is my look at the standings and just fun look at how it may or may not affect whether or not you win the Stanley Cup, and how it may or may not affect Winnipeg, Tampa, Vegas, and Washington. So if any players from those teams are watching, yeah, you've got a decent chance. Vegas and Washington can make their spots 3 as well, or Winnipeg or Tampa could get the 4th win for their spot. It just shows how strong the league is from top to middle top, from 1 through 7. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.